My long-anticipated Dubs in the Shrubs campout wasn't in the cards for me this year, but I still managed to get to the show on Sunday and also squeeze in some overdue maintenance and repairs this week. Don't go away. The final episode of Season 2 is next. Hello again. Glad you could join me on this final episode of Season 2 of the Wilson the VW Bus podcast. I'm your host, Joe. It's been 3 days since I have driven Wilson, and man, I am missing the experience. I needed to take my Camaro to work the other day and to run a few errands with it, but I think tomorrow I should bust Wilson out again and get a few more smiles and miles. Other than these past few days, I have been driving Wilson everywhere, including to work at my central office, where Wilson has been piquing some interest. There have been a bunch of people that I work with that never knew that I owned a VW bus, and then when they saw one in the parking lot, they all knew who he must belong to. I had a few of the elementary kids on the playground in the school right next door yell out to me, "Hey, mister, I like your old minivan." I was like, oh, okay, thanks. I could guarantee they probably have never seen a VW bus before. The only issue with parking at that office is that some of the parking spots have an irregular pavement, and the one day I backed up into a spot only to hear the grinding sound of something hitting. I knew that I wasn't too close to the sign or to another car, so when I hopped out to inspect what I had done, I saw that I had backed up and scraped the tailpipe on the pavement again. I just fixed that. This time it was just a light touch, and that there was no real damage done. Oh, I forgot to mention that a few weekends ago, I also spotted this cool double-sided wooden sign, white with black lettering, that said open on one side and closed on the other side. It was at a garage sale next to my old high school, and for only $10, it now sits proudly on display in my garage. You all know how I love vintage Petroliana, and I thought about bringing it to work for my office, but it's too vintage and old school for a technology office. As I alluded to in the show intro, I was able to get some long overdue maintenance done on Wilson in this past week. First and foremost was an oil change. I had ordered my gasket kit from J-Bugs and picked up the oil and filter from the local Advance Auto store. Yes, I have a remote oil filter on Wilson, and I think that aside from the filtering duties, that remote filter may also be helping me keep Wilson running so cool all the time. I probably have a full extra quart of oil in my bus over a stock oiling system, and considering that there isn't much oil in a stock air-cooled VW and that the oil also cools the engine, I can really appreciate the remote filter now. I jacked up the rear end, and because, as you know, Wilson's pretty low, I threw some jack stands under the bus before climbing under with the drain pan. And when I went to put a wrench on the drain plug, I found out that it was just finger tight. Not good. The 6 nuts holding the oil plate onto the block were not much tighter either. So I knew that they had a tendency to loosen up a bit, but now I'm going to make sure to keep a better eye on them. I drained the oil, removed the filter, and then filled it all up with a few nice quarts of fresh, high zinc 2050 oil. Now that I still had the rear of the bus up in the air, I remembered that a few days earlier we experienced a little cold morning hard start that inspired the installation of a hard start relay. I've read about this little trick for a while, and some VW enthusiasts put in a hard start relay on all their Dubs just for peace of mind. Although I've never been unable to start Wilson, occasionally I do get a little starter hesitation. You see, the battery is back in the far right rear corner, and then the starter wire takes the powers all the way to the front left-hand corner of the bus to the ignition key, and then it goes all the way back to the right rear corner again where the starter is. That's like 15 feet of 55-year-old wiring that builds up resistance over time and can drop that voltage before it ever hits the starter solenoid. Some people say that the relay solution will save your ignition key wiring, or at the very least prevent that dreaded click, click, click of an underpowered starter solenoid when you try to start your VW. It's really a very simple fix. You install a 4-post relay just before the starter solenoid, taking the starter wire off the solenoid and making it the trigger wire for the relay. Then, the load side of the relay takes the power from the positive battery feed at the starter and jumps it to the solenoid again without any loss of voltage. The hardest part is locating a good ground for the relay. Luckily, I had a nice big bolt attached to the floor pan where the seatbelt was connected to the floors, and that was a perfect ground connection. I added a new relay, and Wilson fired right up without issue. So now the oil was changed and the starter circuit was upgraded. I was ready to go to the Dubs in the Shrubs camping event weekend. The only problem was the rain. It rained all night, the night before, and all day, and I just couldn't stand the thought of making my camping debut with Wilson on a rain-soaked outing. I've never been to the Tall Cedars Picnic Grove before, so I wasn't sure about the condition of the grounds, and I know that camping on Saturday was definitely off-road. What if I got stuck in the mud? Or even worse, what if I got stuck in the mud and then blocked the other participants from entering or leaving the event? It wasn't worth the risk, at least not to me. I sat at home, miserable on that Saturday, wishing that I was camping in Hamilton for the weekend. But then on Sunday morning, the skies cleared, and the sun came out, and the show was on. My son Zach came over early Sunday morning to take a ride with me to the Dubs in the Shrubs car show and swap meet. I mean, just because we missed the campout didn't mean we couldn't enjoy the show. On the way down, we saw a really cool two-toned 64 VW Deluxe bus on the side of the New Jersey Turnpike. It was on the other side of the barrier, so we were not able to stop and assist, but we did see a blue Karmann Ghia that was stopped right ahead of him to help. Zach and I got there at the event early, and they only asked for a small donation to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital for the spectator entrance. A few minutes later, that same blue bus drove into the show field. I stopped to ask if he was okay, and he laughed and said he ran out of gas, but his buddy in the Ghia was right there with him as his wingman. They tried to go out to get gas together in the Ghia, but it was too low, and the tires were rubbing and couldn't handle both of them in the car at the same time. So his friend waited at the bus, and the bus owner went out for gas. He later told me that the Blue 64 was the Volkswagen bus featured in the Sopranos prequel series, The Many Saints of Newark, where 3 buses were used in the filming. This was the bus with the front end damage. I believe it got shot with a shotgun, if I recall the scene. But it was now repaired, of course. The bus was lowered exactly like Wilson, with the Type 1 rear in the back and the same narrowed and inverted spindles in the front. And we talked for a while about our rides and the work we had recently done to them. I did ask him if he wanted to be on the podcast, but he politely declined, feeling that he just wanted to forget about the rough start to his day, and I don't really blame him. Zach and I could not believe what a nice group of people were at this show. Everyone was so willing to talk about their VWs, and the overall atmosphere was one of friendship and good times. He took a bunch of photos of the bugs and buses, the Ghias, things, and VW kit cars. I think I may have sparked a real fire in him to get a VW of his own. Don't tell Kelly, they're supposed to be saving for a house. Of course, we ran into my pal Dave, Wilson's previous owner, who was there with his son and a few of their friends. We all stood around and talked for a long while in the sunny fields of the Tall Cedars Picnic Grove, which was filled with classic VWs that kept arriving all morning. Oh, and the swap meet, there was a nice selection of vintage VW parts to sort through too. The details of my conversation with Dave and the parts that I acquired will all be revealed in the next season of Wilson the VW Bus. It's the best I can do as a cliffhanger, guys. But don't worry, it's not like there's going to be a big gap between seasons. I'll be back soon. Again, I want to thank all of you for joining me and listening to my rants. Take good care of yourselves, fellow bus fans.